Oh. Okay. Now, that was setting up the hardware for the lights. Obviously, tearing them down is just the opposite. Now that we've got them set up, let's talk about how to actually activate the lights and use them. You'll notice on the back of the lights there are 5 switches. They correspond to each of the 5 bulbs. Now, which bulbs you activate is actually not all that important. If you turn on the center bulb as opposed to a side bulb, it's all being muted by the cloth in front of it, so it's not going to be too specific. The idea is, how much light do you want? The more switches you have on, the more light you're going to get. A good safe space to start would probably be, let's say, 2 or 3. Go ahead and flip any 2 or 3 switches on. You may be able to notice from the front when you look at it, you can't tell which lights are actually on. It is being muted to the point where we can't tell if the center or side lights are on. So that's why I say that. So now that we have lighting set up, turned on, do we have any questions about the hardware or the process? Anything at all? All right, it's pretty straightforward. We need to have lights on somebody to record them, so done. Next, let's talk about camera setup, camera positioning. Before we get into settings, in this particular case, we frame up the subject in something called a mid shot. The idea, and I use a slightly off-center mid shot. I included that in the document. The idea is if you're outside, you've got somebody walking around, you might want to pull back, get more of their upper body, get more of their ability to gesture, things like that. For the types of videos we've been shooting, we're mostly just looking at the upper torso, head. Occasionally we'll see some hands for gesturing and things like that, but for the most part we're focused on the head and upper torso. So to get that kind of a shot, if you don't have a table like this, you're going to obviously adjust your camera stand accordingly. In this particular case, we have a table, so what we'll end up doing oftentimes is, and luckily these stands are super versatile, we won't need to have this on the ground. So we'll go ahead and shut it. Perfect. And right about here is where we shoot for these videos. Now obviously, perfect. Yeah, let's go ahead. SIM card, as far as putting the SIM card in the camera, pretty straightforward on the right side here. You slide this patch back, slide the panel back towards you. It'll flip open automatically. Put the top end of the card in first. Push in until it clicks. Go ahead and close the flap, slide it forward, locked and loaded. So putting the card in, quite simple. Let's see here. So the lens, obviously before you can shoot, you need to take the lens cap off. So there's a couple things I would recommend having a small spot where you set auxiliary gear during the process so everything stays in the same spot. But yeah, so once the lens cap is off, we'll talk about the specific camera settings in a minute. But before we get into the minutia, I just want to kind of talk about the process at large. If you, this top knob on the left side of the camera is where you actually switch between your different settings options. So you have automatic focus options, you've got specific options for different like weather and lighting situations. What we're going to do is we're going to set it to M for manual. So you push down the button, you twist it until the little M for manual is facing the little selection icon there, okay? Once you have it on manual, then we'll be able to go into the settings, set up our ISO, set up our light settings, so that they can stay where we need them. Another thing that you'll need to know how to switch between as far as the settings go is the video or picture setting here. Right facing you from the back side of the camera is a small selector that'll go between 2 different icons. One is a little white icon of a camera, the other one is a camcorder, which is a red icon. Red to indicate a blinking light, recording, we're getting live footage here, okay? So switch the selector to video, and as soon as you do that, you'll, let's see here. There we go. Okay. So now we've got it set to manual for our settings. We've got it set to video, and we've got the lens cap off. So as you can see, we're now getting an image of where we're actually shooting, okay? So at this point, can I get you to sit in that chair just so we can frame up the shot and kind of show how that's done? Also, can I get somebody to insert AA batteries into, did you already put batteries in order?
There's some charging over there, but they're yellow, it looks like, so maybe.
Perfect, that's fine. Let's see if this one works here.
Yeah, I tested one of them.
Yeah, we got some. So I just need 2 AA batteries into that, right there. Another thing to consider is the transmitter and the receiver need to be set to the same channel. Just like a CB radio, you need to be on the same channel to talk, right? Similarly, they need to be on the same channel to communicate. So you have A through D. In this case, we're just going to use A. We're going to turn the transmitter on. You'll know it's on because there's an indicator light at the top. If that's not coming on, you're going to want to replace the batteries. I would definitely recommend keeping extra batteries with this setup, both AA, which it looks like we have an ample supply of, as well as extra charged Canon batteries for the camera itself. Okay. You don't need to affix that to your belt or anything, but if you want to, you go ahead and clip that onto your shirt. We might try to get some audio. Thank you. Now, this is going to be a miracle if on our first try we get a successful recording here, but we're certainly going to try. Okay. So power on. Frequency A. So he's transmitting from A. We're receiving at A. We've got our mixer set up for the right channel to be taking a. Now, I will say this. This part is sometimes the confusing part for people. When you get into a mixing board, you're starting to turn knobs, you're going to be affecting the sound. What I would say, a good way to think of this is your gain levels. How much heat do you have on that microphone? If you have him recording and you crank this knob all the way up, the right earpiece is going to hear increased volume on the audio. Now, there are other things to contend with audio. There's something called clipping. If you turn up a gain too loud, to the point where you've got too much energy pumping through the mic, you can get a really muffled kind of sound that's called clipping. We're going to avoid that by starting out with just a medium setting for both of these. Adjust as necessary as you do the work, but typically, if you keep this in the middle, you should be fine. So that's that. Oh, and MS, we're going to switch that from, how do I have mine? Let me see, make sure. Yeah, we're going to switch that to stereo. So it comes on M for mono. Common lingo you're going to find in audio here is mono versus stereo. That being one channel versus a split channel for each ear. We want to have this in stereo, so we're going to switch that to stereo. Again, once you've set these to the midway and to stereo, you shouldn't have to monkey with that too much. If anyone has any questions, just let me know. Okay, so another thing to contend with is we no longer have our image on the display. Sometimes if you sit for too long, the image is going to go away. A way to get that back is just to push the camera button, just to get us out of the sleep mode for the camera. Okay. Adjusting the actual shot. Now, requires some intuition here, how we frame this shot. There's a couple things to contend with. Can anybody give me any feedback on what they're seeing on this screen and what thoughts they have about what we should do?
It's too high.
Okay, so for starters, we're too high. Couldn't agree more. So let's go ahead and bring this down. And does that look a little better? I agree. To adjust this, you roll this wheel back, and then you have full range of motion of the camera. And then you roll it forward to tighten it. It'll be ginger, it'll kind of change the dynamics of your shot. Okay, now we've got this. Is there any other feedback we have about this shot that we think should maybe be edited?
The background. The picture in the background.
The picture in the background, what about it?
It's, I guess you could say it's,
Too clear?
no, it's,
taking too much space up.
yeah,
in the shot.
so it's kind of, you're either looking at him or looking at the paint. So you want to focus on the speaker.
Sure,
So
and this
it's
is actually,
distracting.
no, it makes perfect sense. This is something that gets into kind of a subjective, kind of creative style thing, is how we frame the shot. Are we centering the subject in the shot? Is the subject slightly off center and we're gonna pull in elements from our background? And how are we doing that? In this particular case, I typically will shoot with, instead of having him be centered, I don't like that light switch there myself. If I'm trying to create something that's like professional content, I don't want a piece of art. Love it. I love a piece of art in the background of the shot. I don't like technical equipment, things like that. So my first thought is I want to get rid of that light switch. So what I end up doing is adjusting the shot just to get that out of range. Now, in this case, what I end up with is a shot that does prominently, askew of our subject, feature the background, feature the art. That is me working creatively with this space to try to get the most out of the shot. Again, different people are going to have different preferences. Somebody else might line this shot up and say, the light switch is great, I love it, I don't want so much of that painting. I'm going to leave that to you guys to figure out, but in general, this is the way I would set up the shot, is I don't want to see that light switch. And I like the art, I think it classes it up. So that's how we're setting that up. Any questions so far on setting up the camera, framing our subject, and just getting our basic settings set up?
And it's okay to have, you would want the subject to be separate from, like, let's say an art piece background. You want that gap versus them sort of, their head be in front of it.
Well, this is actually a really kind of nuanced part of shooting video and shooting footage, is the general aesthetic that you're trying to capture and the balance, that goes into it. Different people are going to have different preferences as to what they actually want to see showing up. Personally, why we selected this room for these types of video shoots is because we've got an executive that we're shooting these videos for, right? We want to make sure that it looks classy, it's high level. The fact that we have the art, I really want to feature that. I want to make good use of that. So in this particular case, that's why it's so prominent. Also that we're avoiding that light switch. So are there maybe better shots that you could frame somebody up with? Yes. But as with every situation, you're kind of rolling with a set of variables, trying to come up with the optimal solution. Hopefully it's a process that's always evolving, depending on the location that you're shooting and who you're working with. But that gives you kind of an idea of how we're framing up the initial shot. Let's just see, this may or may not work. Let's see if we can test the audio real quick here. You've got plugged in, you've got the mic on. Let's go ahead and just hit record. The record button obviously is right in front of you. It's right around the selector for camera versus camcorder. Go ahead and just say test or say
Test 1, 2, test. This is a test. 1, 2.
Okay, perfect. I'm going to hit stop. Now, this is how we start recording once we have the subject in frame. It's also how we stop recording when we're done. If you want to look back and check on any of the existing footage that you have, you're going to hit this play button here to review playback of what you have. And then, similar to other devices, you've got a scroll wheel or a little button here where you can select left and right to get through the footage. In this case, we only have the one short clip that we just took. This should also be a touch screen, so you can just hit play there. Now you hear me talking, but it's not picking me up right on this camera here. It sounds like it's picking me up from his mic. So can you tell how his voice came in clearer than mine?
Yeah.
You would think if it was recording from the camera that it would be picking up my voice first. It's not. So we're getting successful audio from our transmitting lapel there, okay? So that's a good step. So as you can see, we've got him in frame. We've got the lapel mic set up. Typically I would recommend that the lapel mic goes underneath the shirt because it can compromise kind of the integrity of the shot a little bit. It's smoother if it's not visible. Again, similar to the light switch. You don't want a lot of technical stuff sitting around. It pulls and distracts from what you're trying to focus on. So once you have the mic set up, you've got the subject in frame. We're getting audio from the transmitter to the receiver through the mixer, left and right channel. Then the audio is going to combine with the video onto our SD card. Okay? So we have just successfully captured a video and audio recording using this very basic setup. So that is essentially how we set up the gear, frame the subject, launch the recording, and capture what it is that we're going for. Beyond that, we'll just need to actually go into the camera, and I can do this with you guys watching, or maybe one of you guys can do it. We can see how we want to do it, but actually setting up just some of the light settings in the camera. Again, once you've set those, you shouldn't need to play with them too much. The one other thing I will mention because it's super important is the manual focus. So this lens is equipped with an autofocus, and if you look, right here it says MFAF, that's manual focus, autofocus. We don't want autofocus. I don't know if you guys have ever noticed this, but sometimes with an autofocus, as a subject moves, you'll see a lens trying to adapt, and it can sometimes overcorrect and create a very unprofessional look to the footage. When we manually focus, especially if we have our subject is stationary, when somebody's moving outside, I then might suggest making sure that we have an autofocus that can track them as they move. When we have a stationary subject, there's really no need for us to run the risk of our camera changing focus levels. So in this particular case, we're going to set it to manual focus, and how we do that is, so we've got them framed up again here. There's just, on this particular lens, there's just one ring to turn, and you'll notice as you turn it, that's not what we want, right? Okay, so this will require a little bit of skill here, and between every shot, people breathe, people move, they adjust their chair. Your subject adjusts their chair back a centimeter, your focus is ruined. You might not immediately notice it because it's going to be subtle, but when you actually expand out, a 1080p footage, and you see that half centimeter or centimeter of distance change your focus, it's going to compromise the final product. So it's key to remember that between each session, between each shot, to refocus the camera on the subject. So in this particular case, what I would recommend doing, you've got a stationary subject, pick something with a hard line. If you've got somebody wearing glasses, that's great. You've got a hard line of the frame that you can focus on. Hard striped or checked patterns on the shirt are great. In this particular case, we do have that to work with. Can you give me a little more light? Flip on 2 more of the switches. Perfect. Can you also maybe give me 2 more right over there? Sometimes too much light can really wash out the look, and you can end up something that looks a little too bright. In this case, I'm just doing it to help us notice that what we're going to focus on is the checks on the shirt. I recommend overcorrecting, undercorrecting, going back and forth between them until you have it extremely clear. It's hard to illustrate from a distance, but I would recommend that everybody maybe swing up here for just a second and turn the knob so that they can see what it feels like to focus in and out, and then make sure you have it. So go ahead and line up. If you're planning on doing this or being a part of this process, just play with it a little bit, see if you get a feel for it. Once you have them in focus, go ahead and hit the record button. Let's get another vocal test here.
Test 1, 2, test 1, 2.
Perfect, hit stop. Hit play back. Perfect, now. Beautiful. Okay, so who else wants to give it a shot here? Feel free. Come on. Okay, so go ahead, and this can be moved, so if you want to have this facing you, you can turn it however you need.
Okay.
And then you're just turning that knob until you can see the checks on the shirt come clearly into focus.
Okay.
Perfect, now go ahead and hit the start recording. Appreciate your patience here, you're doing great. Okay, go ahead and give it a test.
Testing, this is a test. Can you hear me?
And hit stop, now hit play back. Perfect. Nicely done. There we go. Anyone else want to give it a shot? I'd love to have everybody take a look here. So right now we're in playback mode. How are we going to get back to recording?
Good job,
How are we gonna
John.
get back to recording?
Thank you.
What do think?
So we're gonna go back to the start-stop, right?
So you could actually launch right into it, but we want to focus first. So what I would say is, to get it back from a playback state, go ahead and hit the camera button and it'll get you back to a live footage. Now this again, now go ahead and hit record. Perfect, let's do the test.
Hello, this is the test. Can you hear me? 1, 2.
Now you stop. Now go ahead and play back. This is good footage we're getting here too. This is great stuff.
Yeah, it's like if they reboot The Office, you're good to go, you're ready to audition.
We got your reel right here.
Alright.
Anyone else want to give it a shot? Come on over. So we're in review mode right now to play back, to get back to a live view. You know what you're doing, love it, okay. Perfect, now go ahead and hit record. And it'll push directly in, yep. It's getting one more test here.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Test 1, 2.
Nice. And then play back. Play back. Perfect. Now, anyone else want to give this a shot? Did we get everybody?
Yeah.
Perfect, okay. One thing to contend with is the audio playback. You're not going to get great sound off of this, so if you actually were looking to, in the moment, play back the video and see how it's going, I would maybe recommend having a separate monitor or something that you could quick take the SD card out of and play it back through. Now, I don't know what kind of device you might want to use for that. I just do it right on the camera. I find it convenient enough, but again, I'm just calling it out. It's very quiet. So if you actually want to recap what was just shot, you're not going to get a full sense of how the focus turned out on this small screen. You're also not going to get a full sense of how the audio turned out on this small screen. I've just gotten used to being able to spot, is it in focus? Yes. And is this audio quality or is it clipping? No, we're good to go. I can tell from this small screen, but I can see how it might be easier if you had another device to review it on. So, once you are done with that, just shut the camera off right here to the by the selection wheel that we had for manual. You just slide it to off. You'll close the viewing window. You will remove the camera from the mount, and then you can begin a teardown process. Obviously, figuring out where everything else goes in the bag, turning off all of your gear.
And how did you know, like, the distance between the light boxes and the subject were okay?
Sure, that's a great question. So, I personally just felt it out in this room. I set it up. I knew I wanted to have him fully lit. We weren't trying to get a shadow on one side. We weren't going for any sort of artistic lighting. We just wanted to make sure that we had something that was bright and professional. There's nothing worse, in my opinion, than looking at something that's supposed to be professional content that has poor lighting and poor sound. It's immediately apparent, it makes it boring, and a lot of times you're not going to actually sit and watch the whole video if it doesn't sound good or have enough light. So in this case, all we did was make sure that we had from both sides light coming at the subject so that he was fully illuminated. The amount of light we change depending on the day. Sometimes the sun is shining, we have to close the blinds. Sometimes we have to wash out some glare from sun shining on to kind of balance it. These are things that require intuition, engagement, active participation with the process. There is no 100% set it and forget it. You're going to have to respond to the variables around
Right.
you. But in this case, it was just a very simple kind of 45-degree angles, get lights on both sides, make sure that there's full illumination on the subject. Yeah. Any other questions with regards to setting up the gear, getting a successful recording, audio, visual, camera, anything at all?
How far do you think, so if we were doing a listening session per se, right?
Mm-hmm.
How far can you put the camera in that back? Do you see any issues with the wireless?
No,
picking
no.
up the audio?
No, that's a great question. So the transmitter and the receiver should work over any distance that you should need to contend with. Unless, of course, you're like trying to shoot the video from the top of a building, you've got somebody talking at the bottom. You could maybe get some sort of an effect where it zooms in and you could still get crystal clear audio through the transmitter. That shouldn't be an issue. So yeah, the audio should work over any range that you should need to do it. And if for some reason you got ambitious with a project that needed an extreme distance for a particular shot, I would maybe recommend looking into drone technology or looking at a better transmitter receiver setup. This is fairly basic.
I also think that this camera and tripod minus the light boxes, if you have an executive who might be speaking at an outdoor community event, you could probably tripod it, put the lavalier mic and have them just record it, because sometimes we're in that situation where we want to record it, but we're with our iPhones, right? And we're trying to get as close to the subject as possible. But the sound is just impossible to capture unless we're, maybe standing right behind the speaker or the microphone that might be behind the crowd. Could that be something?
Absolutely. Are you saying in this case, like maybe sans the lights, we're just rolling with a tripod, camera, and the transmitters?
Yep.
Absolutely. You can very quickly, on the fly, assuming you have a willing participant, toss the lapel mic on them and be able to mirror the success in the video and audio recording.
Or put the mic on the podium that they're going to speak at too, right?
Certainly, yes.
Yeah.
This is designed.
The only thing is sometimes people tap the podium, and
Yeah.
you don't want that pounding sound to pick up on the mic if it's on the on the podium.
That is very true. I've noticed a lot in the presidential debates and a lot of the debates that go on. when they hit the podium or they bump the mic, you hear this absurd banging noise. It is nice to have a lapel mic because there's just very little interference.
But if you rush for time, I mean, you just.
Yeah, it'll pick up the sound. The thing with the lapel mic is obviously you want it to just be very close to the mouth. The further away it gets, then you have to increase the gain to get the signal. And once you increase the gain, now you're picking up audio from all sorts of other things around you. The idea, just to put it into a nutshell, is you want the mic, and this is for a lot of recording types, you want the mic to be close to where the audio is, and you only want to use as much gain as is necessary to capture that audio without also pulling in additional audio from the surrounding area. That way we are just listening to the speaker, and what you end up with is a very crisp final product. Yeah, but no, that's a great idea. You certainly can. The only other thing I would mention is if you're going to be doing it on the fly, manual focus versus autofocus, I would explore into autofocus options if you have anybody that's moving. Again, if they're stationary and you've got the tripod,
Right.
rock it out.
Right.
Manual.
Cool.
Otherwise, auto might be worth contending with. Other than that, that is it. That we've addressed each piece of gear. We've set it up. We've got a successful recording.
Do we need to adjust when we're on manual setting? Do we need to adjust shutter or aperture?
You will not need to. No, everything that we just covered will be the process when you actually go to record it. Before we leave here, I will sit down and spend probably 5 or 10 minutes and tinker through. I'm not familiar with this particular camera model,
Okay.
but I'll tinker through and make sure that we have the same basic settings that I used, so that we can at least have a starting point that recreates the exact,
Sure.
visuals that we've been getting. So,
Speaking of lighting,